like thundered and got really scary at one point. So thanks for coming out. I'm super excited today because I get to celebrate the Advent with you guys. And for me, the holidays are a really fun time of the year. Though a lot has changed since the days of waiting on Santa Claus or gathering at my grandma's house for a big family dinner, I really appreciate how the change in the season brings about this time where we can just rest and find these really precious moments with our loved ones. But even in this stillness, I find that this season creates like a really busy spirit within me. Even though I really want to share these intimate spaces with my close family and friends, I feel this growing anxiety and pressure to do anything and everything as it relates to Christmas. The biggest pressure for me, it comes in buying gifts. Does anybody else feel that way? You just can't find the time, you don't know what to do. Amen. It's hard. And I'm reminded of this scramble as I think of a Christmas not too long ago. I had just gotten settled into a brand new job, and I was excited to buy real presents for my family, real. Not like gift cards or something that I had made or scrambled and put together. But I'd spent hours and hours and hundreds of dollars on gifts that I thought would be really perfect offerings to my family. Well, these gifts that I got, although I thought they were coming from a really genuine place, they actually told a different story. They told a story that had nothing to do with the person who was receiving the gift. They told a story that pointed back to myself and my own insecurities. Insecurities of feeling forgotten or feeling as though I didn't matter to the people that I cared the most about. What I thought were these really genuine offerings were just things that were really fleeting and items that have since collected a lot of dust. The gifts that we give to other people, whether they be big or small, in good deed or actual like material things, they all tell stories. And so I'm excited today because we'll continue in this journey of the Advent conspiracy. And we'll look at the story of Jesus' birth in the 2nd chapter of Matthew. So if you don't have the Bible, I invite you to grab one or turn there on your phone. But we'll see how the contrasting stories of King Herod and the wise men, the gifts that they offered to Jesus, we get to see how they call us to embrace this really radical call when we're called to push and spend more and exert ourselves just for the purpose of this holiday season. I think that God today is calling us to actually live into this moment of spending less. So before we get started, let's go ahead and pray. God, I thank you so much just for this opportunity where we get to share in this season of remembering your Son and taking a look at what it is that you have gifted to us and the ways that you call us to respond. God, I pray that as we walk through this story today, that we just delight in what you have offered to us, and we remember that you've given us a lot. And so I just pray that there will be truth found in that moment. We give it to you, God. In Jesus' name, amen. So the book of Matthew, it opens up with the story of Jesus' birth. And it starts by highlighting his divine ancestry. We see that Jesus is not this ordinary king who was placed in his position by a ruling authority or government, but that it was divine. He was to be born of Mary, who was betrothed to Joseph. And as we see this prophecy becomes fulfilled through this divine moment, we also discover a restless spirit in King Herod. And so chapter 2, verse 1 reads, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born the King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and we have come to worship him.' When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, 'In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, he determined from them what time the star appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the young child. And when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also." Appointed by the Roman Empire, King Herod was a lavish ruler, and he was known for his great gain and wealth. Because he had to navigate these tensions between the Jewish people and the Roman Empire, he couldn't afford to really sit still. He used really vicious battles and his grand building projects in an effort to maintain the peace and order in Jerusalem. King Herod had spent several years to build an empire that told the story of his power and his prominence for generations to come. But when the news of Jesus' birth appears in verse 1 of the second chapter, it's almost as if the king's life begins to flash before his eyes. As the wise men approach him with this excitement of the coming Messiah, he begins to scheme with his officials. He's concerned as he considers these new upgrades that he's made to the temple and how quickly they'll be forgotten once Jesus comes to offer something that's way more appealing. There's this deep frustration that begins to grow in his heart as he considers his countless victories in his menacing spirit and how it will be lost among his people. His past of pleasing people and the drive for more, it led him to great deceit and despair. And though King Herod's offer to worship the birth of Jesus, it wasn't really genuine. It tells a story that each of us can probably relate to during this holiday season. Instead of leaning into this moment of worship, he's driven by his anxiety and this pressure to maintain his status. King Herod has somehow bought into this narrative that what he has to offer just simply isn't good enough. And I have a feeling that a lot of us have felt this way at some point in our lives. It might be that we're parents and we're sitting today really wrestling with the thought that what we have to offer isn't enough, or that we can't honor the desires of our children. Or maybe today we're thinking in this holiday season and we're growing frustrated with the efforts of our friends and we've given ourselves to them, and it feels like, man, they don't really take notice of it or they don't see it at all. You might even be plotting and scheming in this very moment, thinking of how you can orchestrate the perfect gift or display of your affection. But church, I really want to caution you today with this mindset. While these concerns are valid and they're very real, I think that this is a really bad way to see of how we can give of our time and our efforts in this holiday season. It's really important that we focus on the posture of our giving and how we choose to love others, that it not come from a place of just great fear or feeling like we're going to lose position and status in somebody else's life. As Herod built up a reputation of doing just for the sake of pleasing others or calming his own fears, we can find ourselves in a wealth of debt during this holiday season. The story that Herod tells should serve as a warning to us. We have to be really careful of the posture of our giving and be mindful of its purpose. As we continue to look at the story that Herod tells, it's also one of missed opportunity. After hearing the news from the wise men, we see that all of Jerusalem, and this is a reference to the chief priests and the scribes, they become very troubled too. And this is super ironic because the very people that the king goes to consult for what he should do next, they should be the very ones that affirm the worship of Jesus Christ. Instead, they choose to respond in the same fear that King Herod has, and they begin to plot and to scheme with him. I understand that this is a threat of the opposing power that was coming to push back the kingdom of Herod. But they missed out on a really unique moment where they could have worshiped the coming of something that was much greater than what the king could have potentially offered. Can you imagine what this moment might have been like if this moment was worshipped or acknowledged by Herod and his officials? What if the time and the energy that they placed into being anxious about Jesus' birth was actually directed towards spending time in worship? We can easily get caught up in this mindset, but there's so much hope to be found in verse 9 of chapter 2 as we look at the insight that the wise men provide in their giving to Jesus. So verse 9 reads, "When they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east went before them, till it came and stood over where the young child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their country another way." In some translations, the wise men are also referred to as magi or astrologers, and we would consider these to be magicians. While some believe that their knowledge of science and the stars was a form of pagan worship, they actually had a vast knowledge of Hebrew scripture, so it makes sense that they could perceive the coming of the Messiah. The wise men were about 5 miles outside of Jerusalem when they saw the star, and they stood in complete awe. And when I think of this moment, I can't help but to imagine the childlike innocence of a son or a daughter who has just received the perfect gift from their parent. What King Herod perceived as a threat incited an act of worship among this group of men. The wise men tell the story of humble gratitude and a deep appreciation. The first thing that we see the wise men give is their time. Once they received news from the star, they began a long journey to Bethlehem. Now, on average, a 5-mile walk can take about an hour and a half, but that's only if you're taking some really first steps. Your arms are swinging, your legs are moving, your hips are also rotating. But now I also want you to imagine the journey between Bethlehem and Jerusalem. My study Bible tells me that this is no walk in the park, and I can only imagine the sand dunes, the conflicting terrain, and things like that. It had to be really hard to reach this place where Jesus was born. And though the wise men invested so much of their time traveling to this place, they were motivated by the hope and the promise of Emmanuel, God with us. What might it look like for each of us to adopt this posture during this holiday season and trust God with our time? As one of the busiest and most expensive times of the year, it's also one of the loneliest. The pressure to fill the skirt of the Christmas tree or having a celebration that's worthy of all of the hearts on Instagram, it's a really isolating experience. But this week, the Advent conspiracy is calling us to neglect that pressure. It's calling us to live into the narrative that we see on display by the wise men. Remembering the birth of Jesus, it's a really sweet reminder that God chose to dwell on the earth, and he desires to be in relationship with us. What would it look like if we shared this with others? We see a small glimpse of this on display in the second gift that's offered by the wise men. In addition to giving of their time, they offer their worship. After traveling through what I would imagine to be, again, sand dunes and really conflicting weather conditions, they don't come into the house expecting to find water and a place to lay their head, but instead, upon seeing the child with Mary, his mother, they fell down and they worshipped him. Humbling themselves, they offered an act of adoration to Jesus. And I have to ask myself, what would it mean if we spent this time in worship? Instead of choosing to reflect on the latest trends, the best deals that we can find, or the very things that we feel we might be lacking, we instead spent time in praise for what God has given to us through his Son. When the wise men see the star, they come into the house to greet Jesus, and I wonder if they sang some of the first Christmas songs. And not the songs that are filled with bells and really jolly lyrics, but a deep praise that speaks to the majesty of Jesus as King and a love for his gracious kindness. This is a type of spending that I long to have all throughout the year. A heart that's not just excited about the gifts that I can receive or the songs that I hear, but one that adores the Messiah for who he truly is. The final gift that we see from the men are their treasures: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And I want to take a moment to pause, because I don't want us to walk away with the thought that, one, we can't go out and buy gifts for the people that we love. You can most definitely do that. I would encourage you to. But I also don't want us to walk away with the thought that we have to go out and buy lavish gifts. I definitely don't have any gold, so don't ask me for any. And I don't know where you can go find frankincense and myrrh, so good luck on that one. But what's important here is the posture behind the giving. After spending time in worship with Jesus, the men gave up their excess so that they could then worship fully. As astrologers and men of God's word, they probably had some prominence in society and were pretty well off. They could have decided to pitch in for just one gift, or maybe split the cost somehow. Maybe you Venmo me and you cash at me and you give me this. But they didn't do that. They gave completely of themselves. And it was out of a heart of pure simplicity and worship for who Jesus is and what he was here to do. Where Herod was motivated by the fear of loss, the wise men found so much gain. They were willing to exert less of themselves, unfazed by the conflicting narrative around them, to spend and give from this place of fear, so that they could honor Jesus in his fullness. After spending some time in really sweet fellowship with Jesus, Mary and Joseph, the wise men received divine instruction to not return to Herod and to go back home another way. And I feel like that is what God is calling us to today. As I sat with this thought of spending less this week, I was super challenged. If I'm being really honest, I was really convicted. Like Herod, a lot of my life is a constant juggling act of just doing things. I feel like I have a lot of people to honor, people to please, and things that just have to simply get done. And this became really apparent this week as I was preparing to tie up some loose ends as I'm heading out of the country in just a couple of hours. I was ready to compensate for some lost time with just things and events. And as I reflect on my week and all of its challenges and the mess that came with it, I got to see that spending less is actually really valuable. No gift can make up for the time that I spent with my sister in our many midnight conversations. There's no amount of money that could replace the affection and the genuine care and concern that my parents showed for me as I was sick and battling a cold. There's no amount of time at the go-kart arena that can replace the time that I got to spend with my younger brother just decorating the tree and telling him the Christmas story. These are moments that I've prayed for, and I would have missed them if I did not see this concept of spending less. If anything today, I really want us to walk away with one thought. What we perceive to be little or not enough is actually very significant, and it's worth so much more than we could ever think of or imagine. And as we get ready to go into another act of worship, I just want to encourage each of you here today. I want you to know that God has given you an abundance in this season, and that your giving should come from a place of security, humility, and gratitude. Don't walk away thinking, again, that you can't go out and show your appreciation and a gift for your family, but just make sure that the posture of your heart is right. I know that this is really hard to hold on to in a season where so much of life is happening and it feels like time is winding down and you've got to fit everything in. But in these moments where you begin to question your posture, I would encourage you to be like the wise men. I would encourage you to look up and to see the star, to consider what the star has given you in this moment. Again, as we go into this last little bit of worship, I would really encourage you to take some time to notice the star and the light that it's given to your life. And my prayer is that it becomes the story that you tell your gifts with this year. So as Lawrence comes up, I just want to spend some time in prayer. God, I thank you for the gift that is found in your Son. And I thank you for all that that represents, Lord. And I pray that as we spend this time in worship, that we would just see the abundance that you've given to us in our lives. And that that giving would be a place where we can encourage others, God, and to speak truth into them. So I pray that you impress that into our hearts. In Jesus' name.